Hi, Yinnies. Welcome, if you're new around here, to a Yin Yoga podcast. If you are a familiar, welcome back. Today's topic was a request, actually. Today, we're going to talk about the 5 elements according to Taoism and TCM, which is also connected to Feng Shui. So it's all sort of one big interconnected package. We're going to talk about the 5 elements as an overview. So the request was 5 elements for dummies. I don't really like the for dummies part. So we're going to say 5 elements 101. So this will be an overview because I do go into this more in depth in my teacher training. And even then, there's way more that you could look into as far as the elements and things like that. So really, this is like an incredibly rich, many layered subject matter. So this will be, again, a 101, an overview. And especially in different styles of Qigong, they go into this in even much more depth. There's like animals connected to it and all kinds of things that I'm not qualified to talk about because I'm not a Qigong expert. But just to let you know that this is an incredibly rich and deep subject matter, and this will be a bit of an overview. And because most of you are yoga teachers, I just want to mention, dear yoga teacher, please do not take this overview, make a couple of notes, and then decide that you're going to teach a workshop on this. That is not skillful. You are not an expert in this area. You haven't taken a more in-depth training in this area. Consider this good information for you, for your life, for your practice. And if you are super intrigued by it, then of course, deeper study is a great idea. And again, I do the second half of my training, or maybe even more than half. The first little bit of my training is more Western stuff. That's where we talk about, all of the poses and trauma and like the intended areas of the poses and how to teach yin and how to sequence and all of that. And then the second half is all 5 element theory, meridians and sinew channels and the seasons, etc., etc., etc. So if you are looking for more on this, that is something that is included in my training. And if you want more information about my training, if you want to get on the wait list, just look in the show notes. There's a link that says get on the wait list. And once you click that link, if you look way up to my picture on that page or way down to the bottom, you will see an area where you could click a button and enter your name and email. Or if you just hang out and read for a couple minutes, there will be a polite pop-up that will slide in from the side and you can enter your name and email there. And then you'll be on the wait list for the next round of my training or the next one after that, if the next one doesn't work for you. Basically, you're on the wait list until you tell me to take you off or you take yourself off. And while you're on the wait list, you're going to get some other goodies from me, like videos. You're going to get these podcasts. Sometimes I'll just send out little extras like music that I've stumbled across that I really like, or maybe a sequence. So you're going to get a lot of little bonuses along the way to registration opening up when you're on the wait list. And then the final thing that you get on the wait list, which nobody else gets, is advanced registration notice and a coupon code. The first 5 people get access to sign up for 25% off. And those are only available on the waitlist. So if you've been listening to the pod and you've been thinking about doing more yin training or your first yin training, definitely get on the waitlist. I've had a lot of questions from people who have taken other trainings as to whether or not they should take my training. And what I'll say by this is get on the webpage and read what we cover in the training. And if you look at it and you're like, oh, we didn't cover those in my last training, then there's the answer to your question. Every teacher trainer has a different zone of expertise and thing that they really focus on in their course. So it is not at all unusual to take multiple yin trainings, especially if your training was quite short. Like I see a lot of these 20, 30-hour trainings. That's nowhere near enough. That's like a little toe dip in the water, 20 or 30 hours to pique your interest. But if you really want to get well immersed, then it's not at all unusual to take more than one training. Just to say that the 5 elements is something we go into way more in depth in my training. But today we will do an overview or a 101. Before we get into that, I just want to read a little bit of feedback that I got on my training. This is from Amanda Kingsmith, who, if you do not know, has a podcast. So if you're a yoga teacher, it's called the MBOM podcast. It's a yoga podcast all about how to help you in your business. I've been on there several times. Amanda's a great soul. You can check that out. So this was from Amanda. My biggest hesitation about signing up was just the time and being able to make the time around my daughter's schedule. The first day we were doing our practice, I realized that it had been over a year since I had done an actual full-length yoga class, and it felt so good to give myself that time. So no regrets in joining. I learned so much. I didn't have other yin training, only restorative. I hadn't practiced yin in a long time either. The last teacher I had that I practiced with was no Nick Danu. That's so sweet. I'm totally sold on the practice since practicing with you. I learned so much in this training. Major takeaways were around how the skeletal system is different, so the poses will look different in different bodies, and the way that you teach that you're very open to people choosing their own experience while being guided, and only going 50 to 60% in the poses. No one has ever guided me just to go to 50 to 60% of the way in the poses. And I wonder if that's why I hadn't loved yin in the past. I definitely feel ready to teach yin yoga. It was super helpful to do the practices on top of the teachings and to come away with a ton of sequences to use. What I liked best about the program was the online format and that it was recorded. And it was great for me with my schedule. I also liked the format of doing a lot of different types of practices and then discussing them and applying them to what we were learning. I would 100% recommend this program to other teachers. You were great. So there you go, my friends. It's from Amanda Kingsmith. Okay, let us dive into today's topic. So as I mentioned, this is going to be like a 5 Elements 101 sort of entry level. There's so much more richness in Taoism. And for those of you who don't know, if I keep saying Taoism, Chinese medicine is based on Taoism. So if you're like, what does this have to do with yin? The concept of yin and yang, Taoist concepts. So there's so much more that we could do and study and learn here. But again, I do not want this to be overwhelming. And a good chunk of it is in my teacher training program. So there are things like in TCM, you'll often hear that this opens to, and it might be the mouth, the nose, the whatever. There's sense organs, there's tissues of the body. There's, if you go deeper into Qigong, there's like animals. So there's a lot. Feng Shui is also connected. I'm going to stick to an overview. Those of you that are watching this on YouTube, and if you did not know, dear teacher listening, if you're on a podcast app and you would rather watch it on YouTube, I post the almost completely unedited. I'll take out the odd thing if it's really bad on YouTube, like if I, started coughing partway through or something. But otherwise, the unedited versions are always uploaded on my YouTube channel. That's always available if you want to watch rather than listen, for those of you that are visual folks. Or of course, you're welcome to stay here and listen. But if you are watching on YouTube, you might notice that my eyes will be moving around because I have notes. Because otherwise I would forget something, and we can't have that. All right, my dear friends, shall we get into this? So 5 Elements 101. So the Taoist 5 elements are different than the Indian or Ayurvedic elements. And I know that sometimes as yoga teachers, we like to take something new we're learning and connect it to something we've already studied. I would caution you to resist doing that. From my experience in my study, the philosophies of Indian yoga and Taoist systems are very different, actually. So a lot of times people want things to be same, but in this case, it's a lot more like same, but different, right? So there are differences in the philosophies and in the elements themselves. So rather than sitting here and try to make these associations in your mind between what I'm saying and the Indian system or Ayurveda, just slide that to the side for now and try to just stay here. Just like when you took your very first teacher training, you didn't know anything about the Ayurveda system either. So you weren't trying to compare it to something else, right? So try to approach this with beginner's mind and with fresh eyes. And that will actually make understanding this easier than if you try to connect it to something that really it's got more differences than similarities, in my humble opinion. So a couple of the differences are just in the philosophy. So the Indian systems of yoga, if you look at the Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, for example, are designed to move the energy up and out through your chakras, perhaps, especially if you're a tantric yogi, to eventually transcend the body, merge with the divine, right? And to transcend and move on, to become enlightened. In Taoism, however, they're actually much more interested in cultivating and preserving and cherishing the qi and the jing, which is your essence. And so it's got a different philosophy. They're not trying to move the energy up and out. They're not trying to transcend the body. If anything, they're trying to be in tune with nature and maintain the health of your body. So that's a little bit different. So the Taoist tradition is a nature-based tradition. So this shows up in the philosophy as a difference, but it also shows up in the elements. So for example, in the Indian system, you have an element of air and ether. We do not have those in Chinese medicine. We have instead things like wood and metal. And I'll get into these in much more depth in just a little moment. Okay, so let's dive into that. First, I just want to mention that my Mandarin pronunciation is not great. Did not actually study medical Mandarin when I took my Chinese medicine studies. It was one of the courses I wish I would have done before I dropped out of the program, but I did not. So my Mandarin will be imperfect. So we'll talk about the 5 elements, or Wu Xing. First, I want to mention there's a couple of ways that we often see the elements discussed in yin trainings. One of them is the generating and nourishing and the controlling and regulating sequence. So in this system, you would see the elements all in a circle, one feeding directly into the other. And I'm going to do a different approach, but I'll tell you a little bit about that first. The reason why I don't use that system for the 5 elements and for our understanding of it is because I think that's really helpful in traditional Chinese medicine when you're thinking about diagnosis, because you need to know is, fire overacting and what do we do to control fire, et cetera, et cetera. That's not very helpful as yoga teachers. So although I'm going to briefly explain a little bit about that, we're mostly going to focus on an actually older view of the 5 elements in just a moment. So in the view where the 5 elements are all placed evenly in a circle, there are Sheng cycles, and then there's Ko cycles. The Shen cycle is the generating and nourishing sequence. The Ko cycle is the controlling and regulating sequence. And then there's also a destructive cycle, which is overacting, which is the Chen cycle. And then there's an anti-Ko cycle, or an insulting sequence, which is the Wu cycle. So again, I'm only going over this very briefly, simply because if you were to look at the images that are in the podcast image, or if you're watching this on YouTube, it was at the beginning of the thumbnail, you're going to notice that I put Earth in the center. And then if you see other articles or books, or if you've been in other trainings, you might have noticed that they put Earth in the circle itself, not in the center of the circle. And again, that is a really helpful view for those that are studying Chinese medicine. That's one way to look at the 5 elements, only one. And the reason that I'm going to go for the older way is because I'm talking to a bunch of yoga teachers, right? You're not an acupuncturist who's now just about to start to look at these elements and how they show up in your diagnosis and decide what is over controlling, what isn't active enough, et cetera, right? So that system is super good for diagnosis in Chinese medicine, but for Taoists or for yoga teachers, not very helpful. What's more helpful is when we think about the older method of the 5 elements. So before Chinese culture became agrarian, meaning they were in towns and villages and on farms growing their food, they were nomadic. So they would have been traveling around. And in that view, so that's the much older system, the Earth is actually the center. So the earth isn't part of the circle, the earth is the center of the circle. So that's how we're going to look at our philosophy here today. And again, if you look at the picture in the podcast notes or the podcast picture, or if you look at the thumbnail on YouTube, you'll see an image of that. I'll also include that image over on my blog where the full show notes are. So if you want to see that. So the earth is the center. And this system just seems to make way more sense to me for what we would do as yoga practitioners or even for Qigong. So let's talk about the 5 elements, shall we? So we're going to talk first about fire. Now, one thing to note is that each of the elements has meridians and organs attached and connected to it. Fire actually has more than the rest. Some people split this into fire and sometimes called ministerial fire, whatever the heck that means. That is not the way that I learned it, but there are 4 meridians connected to fire, whereas there are only 2 for the rest. And same with the organs. So I'll talk about fire first, but just know there's more going on with fire than there is with the other elements. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about fire. So of all of the 5 elements, fire is the most yang, which kind of makes sense if you think about it energetically. The color is red. The season is summer, which also makes sense if you think about it logically. The climate would be heat, or the climactic factor, they call it sometimes in Chinese medicine. And then the internal organs, aka meridians and sinew channels, are the heart and the small intestine. Those 2 are paired organs, yin and yang. And then the pericardium and the sanjiao. Again, those 2 are paired, yin and yang. I'll talk just very briefly about what the difference is briefly between meridians and sinew channels, because you may have just heard me say sinew channel and gone, what the hell is that? So a sinew channel is actually the corresponding fascia channel to each meridian. And you won't see this information a lot out there in yin trainings because most of the people that are teaching about meridian theory in their trainings actually haven't studied Chinese medicine. So there's a lot of people out there talking all about the meridians who, if you were to say something about the sinew channels, don't even seem to know that they exist. And I would argue that the sinew channels are far more important to us as yin yoga people than the meridian itself, because that's actually what we're accessing in our practice is the fascia channel or the sinew channel. Some of the sinew channels follow the exact map of the meridian, and some of them actually stop a little short of the full meridian. Okay, so I'm just going to briefly talk about that. Maybe at some point in the future, I will do a what the heck are sinew channels versus meridians. But for now, just know if I keep saying sinew channel, that is the corresponding fascia channel to each of the meridians. Sometimes it follows the whole pathway of the meridian. Sometimes it only does part of it. Okay, so the internal organs, which would mean also the meridians and the sinew channels, are the heart and the small intestine. Those are paired. Heart is yin, small intestine yang. And then the pericardium and sanjiao, again, yin and yang pairs. Now, sometimes people are a little bit confused about pericardium. There is both philosophically and also physically a pericardium, right? It's the protective sac, you could call it, around the heart itself. That is your pericardium. This is in Western anatomy, and also that's what it's called in Chinese medicine. Sanjiao, sometimes called triple burner or triple heater, is a little bit trickier to explain, simply because it's a very sort of Eastern concept. So we don't really have something that we can tangibly put our finger on that is called the sanjiao in the West. Some people say that it is the lymphatic system. Again, this is just a Western idea that they've just added that on, that the sanjiao is connected to the lymph system. It's not really traditional information. In Chinese medicine, there are 3 jiaos, and the Sanjiao is the three jiaos together. I'll talk a little bit about those jiaos just very, very briefly, because again, a lot of this information is beyond the scope of a quick podcast episode. But there are three Dantian and three Sanjiao. Okay, there's the upper jiao, which contains the heart and the lungs, the middle jiao, which contains your stomach, liver, spleen, and gallbladder, and then there's the lower jiao, which is your kidneys, intestines, reproductive organs, and bladder. So some people say that the Sanjiao is those three jiaos together, but some people also say that it is the connection of those jiaos, or even and including the space or the cavities between those jiaos. So you can see it's a little bit esoteric. So those are the organs that are connected to the element of fire. And each of these organ systems has certain times of day on the clock as well, where they're the most active. So 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. is the time of the heart. 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. is the time of the small intestine. 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. is the time for the pericardium. And 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. is the Sanjiao, sometimes called triple burner or triple heater. That's a lot, I know. Fire's the most complex of them all, so bear with me. The direction for the fire element is south, which again makes sense if you think about heat. The emotion is joy. The stage of development for this particular element is growth. The energy quality is expansive. The virtue is righteousness. And the sound is laughing. So we'll just do a brief overview of each of the elements with this kind of a list, but please know there's a lot more. There are tissues of the body. There are openings on the body. Again, I mentioned there are animals in Qigong that go along with this. There's even a whole style of acupuncture, which is kind of controversial to some, called 5-element acupuncture. Some people say that it is sort of a Western creation and it's not overly traditional at all. And others would say actually that it predates what we now know of as traditional Chinese medicine, because a lot of the Chinese medicine traditions were left out when Mao decided to sort of take some of these teachings and bundle them together and then export them as traditional Chinese medicine. And that previous to that, there would have been a lot more focus on the 5 elements in traditional Chinese ways of healing. So again, it's debatable. I don't have opinion either way. I will say that I find 5-element theory very fascinating and 5-element acupuncture very fascinating. It deals a bit more with the personality. And if you're familiar with Ayurveda, and again, I'm not going to compare them to this, but you may have heard of doshas. In 5-element acupuncture, each of us would have a little bit of all of the elements in us, but that we would have what they call a constitutional factor, or an element that sort of makes up the foundation of who we are. And again, that's going to be something for other podcast episodes. But just know that there's actually archetypes that go with this and personality traits that could go with each of these. But again, we're going to stick to 101, and we do a little bit more of that in my training. So that's fire. So I'll just go over that briefly again, because I know that's a lot of information to summarize. So fire, the phase is full yang. So fire is the yangest of the yang. The color is red. The season is summer. The climate is heat, and the internal organs, aka meridians, aka sinew channels, are the heart and the small intestine, which are yin and yang pairs. And then the pericardium and the Sanjiao, which are also yin and yang pairs. And again, the fire element has 4 underneath it. All of the other elements have 2. And so the times of day for the heart are 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. 1 p.m. to 3 is for the small intestine. 7 to 9 is for the pericardium. 9 to 11 is for the Sanjiao, which is also sometimes called triple heater or triple burner. This all gets very confusing, I know. But if you ever hear triple heater, triple burner, that's the same thing as Sanjiao. The emotion is joy. and the stage of development is growth. The energy quality is expansive. The virtue is righteousness, and the sound is laughing. All right, let's talk about earth. So I mentioned at the start of this episode that I'm taking a more traditional, nomadic, Taoist view of the earth element in this, and I do in all my trainings and in my life, rather than the more diagnostic model of earth, where it becomes one in the circle of five. And that is the five element cycle that a lot of they use in Chinese medicine. Okay. So that's not how I'm going to discuss earth. That's great for Chinese medicine, not so useful for us. I'm looking at earth in the more, you could say, vintage way. So earth is the phase is actually yin and yang in harmony. The color is yellow. The season, now this is a little bit tricky because in traditional Chinese medicine, they would say it's late summer. Keep in mind that the Chinese calendar is not the same as our Gregorian calendar. So the seasons start and end at different times. So this makes more sense if you're thinking about that calendar. So in Chinese medicine, in that calendar, they would say that the earth and the season for earth is late summer. From my experience with my studies in Chinese medicine school, the teachers told me that late summer, although we, and especially in North America, might think, oh, I know what you mean. You mean what has sometimes been called Indian summer here. Not the best name, but that's what it's called. That's actually not what late summer is. Late summer is a season that really is only experienced in China climactically. China is a massive continent. And so there's many different regions and they all kind of have their own different weather patterns. And late summer is said to be incredibly humid, incredibly hot, and incredibly damp, right? So we don't really experience, air quotes, late summer the way that they do in traditional China, the way that they were looking at it. So in some traditional Chinese medicine, they say that the season for earth is late summer, but actually, again, if we go back to the more nomadic view of earth as the center, earth is actually the transitions between each of the seasons. So it's the 18 days between summer and fall, between fall and winter, between winter and spring, and between spring and summer. And depending on where you live and what the weather patterns are like. So I know some of us live places where we don't really have four seasons. That's where I used to be. I used to live in Alberta, where we basically had summer, a few days of fall, maybe a month if you were really lucky, and then winter. And then the same thing with your spring. Your spring would be like really small. It would basically go winter, 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 snowing sometimes even up until May, a tiny little bit of spring, and then summer. So no four seasons there. However, now where I live, I have four clear seasons. Even though they're not as extreme, there's clear lines between the seasons. So Earth would be the center. And each season would go into Earth for 18 days before it comes back out and into the next season. So for example, as summer was winding up, it would go transition into Earth for 18 days and then go into fall. As fall is starting to wind up, it goes into Earth for 18 days and then into winter. I think you get the idea. And this actually can be demonstrated often. And this is what the Indian summer, which again, I don't know a better word for it, that's just all I've ever heard it called, is one example for those of us that live sort of in North America. You may have experienced an Indian summer at some point. We're in it right now at the time of this recording. I'm recording this in August. And already as I've been outside, I've noticed that there is still the heat and the daylight and the sun, but that things are already starting to shift, that there's a lot more sort of leaves falling. We're not quite into the fall yet, but there's that transition period where it's like not quite summer. It's not like it was in July, not even like it was 2 weeks ago in August, but it's also not fall yet. And so those transitions, those 18-day transitions, are connected to the element of earth. Earth is the stabilizer. So the color for earth is yellow. And the transitions, again, some people say late summer is the season, but actually transitions between the seasons And again, remembering that the Chinese calendar is not the same as the Western calendar. So the seasons start at slightly different times. The climate is damp. The internal organs, aka sinew channels, aka meridians, that are connected to Earth are the stomach and the spleen. That's the paired organs. 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. is the time of the stomach, and 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. is the time of the spleen. The direction for Earth is center. So this again denotes that much more old representation of the elements where the Earth is literally in the center of the elements. The emotion, when it's balanced, is empathy, compassion, but also connected to the spleen is a sense of pensiveness or worry, and that can really injure or impact the spleen. Or if our earth element is sort of out of balance, we may notice there's a lot of worry going on. The stage of development is transformation, and the energetic quality is stabilizing. The virtue is faith, and the sound is singing. Again, there's so much more I could offer you here, but again, we'll keep this to a 101. Okay, my friends, let's move into the metal element. The metal element is new yin. So when we have this, summer is wrapping up, we're beginning to move into the season of fall, which is connected to the metal element. That is the beginning of starting to also transition from yang into yin. So it's sort of like yin is just beginning. It's new yin. The color is white. The season is fall. The climate is dry. And the organs are the lungs and the large intestine. Those are the two paired organs, aka meridians, aka sinew channels, connected to the metal element. The direction is west. And the emotion is sadness, or sometimes called grief. The stage of development is the harvest, which makes sense if you think about what would be happening in the fall, right? If people were farming, then we would have been harvesting. If they were nomadic, they still would have been preserving and grabbing things for the winter to come and saving, roots and things like that. So harvest, gathering. The energetic quality is contracting, drawing inward. The virtues are prosperity, and the sound is crying. Water. So the water element is the full yin. This is the yinnest of the yin. So it's exactly the polar opposite of fire, right? If fire is the yangest of the yang, water is the yinnest of the yin. The phase is full yin. The color is sometimes said to be very, 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 very dark blue or black. And when you think of this dark blue, think about if you've ever watched any of these sort of deep sea missions where people are going down so deep into the water that you're not quite sure, is that like a dark navy blue now, or is that black? So either of those are the colors for water. The climate is cold, which makes sense because this is connected to winter. And the internal organs, aka meridians, aka sinew channels, are the kidneys and the bladder. 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. is the time of the bladder, and then 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. is the time for the kidneys. This is when the kidneys are the most active. The direction is north. The emotion is fear. The stage of development is storing or preserving. The energy quality is conserving. And the virtue is courage, and the sound is groaning. When you start to learn at some point, if you ever do, about the constitutional factors of people and which element they're associated with, this could be heard in their voice. But I always think of this groaning as sort of like, if you imagine like a really old wooden ship on the ocean, that sort of groan as it, moves through the water. Okay, let's get to wood. So wood, the phase is new yang. So this is where we're leaving the sort of yinnest of the yinnest of the yin of the water element in winter. And we're starting to move into spring, where this is now new yang. Remember, the summer is the yangest of the yang. And so the spring is New Yang. And the color is green. The climate is windy. The internal organs, aka meridians and sinew channels, are the liver and the gallbladder. The times are 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. for the gallbladder and 1 a.m. to 3 a.m. for the liver. The direction is east. The emotion is anger, or maybe more accurately, frustration. The stage of development is birth. This makes sense if you think about the fact that this is New Yang. This is a time of rebirth, right? The energy quality is generative. And the virtues are benevolence, and the sound is said to be shouting. Okay, my friends. So that's just a little bit of an overview of the 5 elements, 5 elements 101. Again, this could be an area of much study for you, whether it's through my own, or if you have another teacher that does yin trainings that focuses on the 5 elements. I find a lot of the trainings out there give a tiny bit of TCM, but they don't really focus much on the elements. And there's so much more to learn about this. Again, the sort of mental emotional archetypes, the constitutional elements, the tissues that they align with, so much more that we could go into. But hopefully that is a good start for you. And I know that sometimes when we hear this kind of information, we want to immediately put it to use. And like we start writing notes, and now before you know it, we're going to do a workshop on the element of fire. I would encourage you not to do that. One of the things that I notice a lot in the yoga verse is teachers teaching with more hubris, or a sense of sort of an overestimation of what they know, or the opposite. So we tend to have in yoga communities either imposter syndrome, so people that maybe do have the expertise but don't believe they do, or the opposite, which is I have a little bit of information that I'm excited about, and I just heard it on a podcast and I took some notes. So now I'm going to go teach a workshop on the fire element. I would caution you not to do that, because everything I've given you here is interesting, and it's hopefully designed to just sort of whet your appetite to learn more. But there's so much that I've left out here. And most of this information will just completely overwhelm your students, or they may start pseudo-diagnosing themselves based on something you've said that actually isn't accurate according to TCM. So they might be thinking, let's just say, for example, they have a lot of trouble in their body at a certain time of day. Like maybe they wake up every night at the same time. Now they might start thinking, oh my God, something's wrong with that organ, right? Which is not accurate per se. So this is why we don't want to take information that we read in a book or that we hear on a podcast and then start going out and spreading it around like we know what we're talking about. So I hope that this just gives you a bit of an overview and a little bit more of an understanding of kind of a Chinese and a Taoist view of the elements, as most of you are probably more familiar with the Indian view. And that if this information resonates with you, that it whets your appetite for a deeper study. I will say, when I was studying traditional Chinese medicine in school, I was enjoying it and I really liked it. And I found it, pretty interesting, and actually kind of made sense to me. I found it logical. Some of my classmates did not. When we were doing yin yang theory, they were completely baffled. And I was like, yes, this makes perfect sense. I understand. I was loving it, but I didn't really fall in love with traditional Chinese medicine, and then have that then pique my interest into eventually starting to study Taoism deeper, until I took the class on the 5 elements. And that was when I was like, oh, my heart just absolutely fell in love with this form of medicine, and the way that the Chinese view the body as completely interconnected with the world around us, with nature, the elements, with the seasons, etc. So if this is something that has sort of wet your whistle, you're excited about it, you want to learn more, again, the second half to maybe even more of my therapeutic yin training is all on this information, and we learn a lot more. about this other than just the bullets that I touched on here for you. Okay. I also have done in the past some seasonal workshops, very brief again, sort of overview like this, and then a practice. And I have some of those available on my blog. I'll put a link to the ones that I have. I'll put links to those in the show notes. So if you want to check those out, if you want to check out a former Zoom workshop with a little bit of the seasonal overview and then some practice, you're welcome to do that. Okay, my friends, until we meet again, goodbye for now.